He asked her to be his contract partner for a weekend retreat, but the guests whispered when they saw their chemistry. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. It was a quiet Friday afternoon when Natalie walked into the upscale hotel lobby, the soft hum of the air conditioning blending with the faint sounds of chatter and clinking glasses. She had always felt out of place in these kinds of environments, but today, there was no turning back. She had made a promise to herself. She had to push through. Natalie wasn't one for luxury, nor was she accustomed to the world of high society events. But when the invitation arrived in her inbox, she couldn't resist. She had a lot of student loans to pay off, and the extra cash offered for attending a weekend retreat as a contract partner was too good to pass up. She had been told to show up as his companion, smile, and follow the rules. Simple enough, right? But as she stood there in the glittering lobby, her mind started to race. She looked down at her outfit, a dress she had borrowed from her best friend, and adjusted her hair nervously. It wasn't exactly the kind of thing people wore to weekend retreats like this one. She was supposed to fit in, but there was no denying the anxiety creeping up her spine. As she checked her phone for the time, a man's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You must be Natalie," he said. She turned to face him. He was tall, well-built, with sharp features and a presence that instantly commanded attention. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and his cold, confident demeanor suggested he was used to being in charge. "I'm Jacob," he continued, offering her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Natalie's heart skipped a beat. She had seen his name on the invitation, but seeing him in person was another story. He was a millionaire. And there she was, an ordinary college student who had accepted his offer to pretend to be his girlfriend for the weekend. Her stomach twisted into knots. "Right. It's nice to meet you," she replied, trying to sound casual, even though every fiber of her being screamed to turn and run. She wasn't prepared for this. Jacob motioned for her to follow him, leading the way to a private dining room where the other guests were already seated. As they walked, the whispers began. The guests eyed them with a mix of curiosity and judgment, sizing up the supposed couple. Jacob kept his cool, his eyes scanning the room as if he didn't care about the attention. But Natalie could feel it. The tension, the expectation. She had to play her part, and fast. Jacob introduced her to the others, all while maintaining a smooth, confident exterior. Natalie tried to keep up, nodding politely, but the weight of the situation started to wear on her. She had no idea what was really going on. Why had he chosen her? Was this all just for show? Or was there something more? She couldn't help but notice the way Jacob seemed to regard her with a mixture of amusement and indifference. It wasn't just a business arrangement for him. There was something about her, something that caught his attention in a way that made her feel both exposed and wanted. The night dragged on, and as the evening wore on, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a part in something much bigger than she had signed up for. She had come here expecting a straightforward, contractual weekend. Nothing more, nothing less. But now, as she caught a glimpse of Jacob's gaze across the room, she wondered if this weekend would change her life in ways she couldn't yet understand. As the night went on, Natalie found herself seated at the lavishly set dining table, surrounded by guests who all seemed to be whispering amongst themselves. The soft murmur of voices filled the air as servers in crisp, white uniforms moved gracefully around the room, placing delicate courses in front of each guest. The golden chandeliers overhead cast a warm, almost surreal glow on the scene, making everything feel both magical and out of reach for someone like Natalie. She tried to keep her composure, but her mind was racing. Was she really going to pull this off? What was Jacob's plan here? Why had he chosen her? The questions lingered, but there was no time to dwell on them now. She had to keep up the act. Jacob, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, as if this world was where he belonged. He chatted with the other guests, never showing a hint of discomfort, his voice low but confident. She admired his effortless charm, his ability to command attention without breaking a sweat. As he spoke, she couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. She was just a college student, barely making ends meet. Here she was, playing the part of his girlfriend for the weekend, pretending to be someone she wasn't. The longer they sat, the more Natalie felt herself slipping into the role. She smiled politely, nodded when necessary, and even laughed at the right moments. But beneath it all, a sense of unease gnawed at her. She was playing a part, but did Jacob know something she didn't? Was this all just a game to him? Or was there something deeper at play here? As the evening unfolded, Natalie noticed the way Jacob's gaze occasionally drifted toward her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And when their eyes met, there was something in his look that made her heart race. Was it just a passing curiosity? Or did he see something more in her than just the woman he had hired for this weekend? By the time dinner was over and the guests began to filter out toward the lounge, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that this weekend wasn't going to be as simple as she thought. As Jacob led her through the grand hallway toward a private lounge area, his arm casually brushing against hers, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. "You did well tonight," Jacob said, his voice smooth, almost approving. "You're a natural." Natalie looked up at him, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks," she replied, her voice a little softer than she intended. They entered the lounge, where a few guests were already gathered, sipping cocktails and enjoying the warm ambience. Jacob made introductions, and Natalie played her part, smiling and engaging with the others. But the longer she spent in his presence, the more she realized something. She was beginning to feel something for him. She hadn't expected it. How could she? This was supposed to be just a contract, a business arrangement. But now, as they stood side by side, exchanging glances and talking to the other guests, she felt a connection, a spark. Jacob was more than just the rich CEO she had expected him to be. There was a depth to him that she hadn't anticipated. But she couldn't let herself get caught up in it. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to lose sight of that. As the night wore on, the chemistry between them became more undeniable. Jacob's casual touches as he guided her through the room, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way he looked at her as though he could see right through her. Everything about him felt so real, so intense. But Natalie couldn't shake the thought that this was all temporary. It had to be. They were only pretending, weren't they? As the night drew to a close, Jacob led her back to her room, his presence looming large in the quiet hallway. "I'll see you in the morning," he said, his tone light, almost teasing. "Don't go thinking you're getting off easy just because you've done your part tonight." Natalie smiled, trying to mask the confusion that had taken root in her chest. "I wouldn't dream of it," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart was anything but. As she closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, taking a deep breath. What had just happened? Was she really just pretending? Or had something more started to form between her and Jacob? The night's events had left her with more questions than answers. She could feel her emotions starting to shift, and for the first time that evening, she realized she might be in deeper than she ever expected. The morning after the eventful evening, Natalie awoke to the soft hum of the hotel's air conditioning, the sunlight peeking through the curtains and casting a warm glow over the room. She rubbed her eyes, still trying to process everything that had happened. The chemistry between her and Jacob was undeniable, but the reality of their arrangement kept nagging at her mind. Was it really just a business deal, or was there something more at play here? She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Shaking off the lingering thoughts, Natalie quickly dressed and headed down to the breakfast area. Jacob was already there, seated at a table near the window, his eyes focused on his phone. He looked up as she approached, offering her a polite smile. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice smooth, though there was a hint of something else in his tone. Natalie smiled back, taking a seat across from him. "Good morning," she replied, unsure of what to say next. The awkwardness between them felt almost tangible, but she couldn't ignore the pull she felt whenever they were in the same room. Jacob set his phone down and leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Fine," Natalie said, trying to keep her response casual. But the truth was, she hadn't slept much. She kept replaying the night's events in her mind, wondering if she had crossed some invisible line. Was this still just a job? Or was there something more growing between them? As the conversation shifted to more mundane topics, Natalie found herself relaxing, the tension slowly ebbing away. Jacob's presence, while commanding, was oddly comforting. He wasn't the cold, distant CEO she had imagined. There was something more to him, something genuine that she hadn't expected. After breakfast, Jacob suggested they take a walk around the property. The sprawling estate was even more impressive in the daylight, with perfectly manicured lawns and an impressive view of the surrounding mountains. As they strolled along the path, Jacob casually slipped his hand into hers, and for a moment, Natalie was taken aback. She looked at him, unsure of what this gesture meant. Jacob, sensing her hesitation, gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice low and reassuring. The simplicity of his words caught her off guard. She had expected the weekend to be full of pretense, of keeping up appearances. But here he was, acting as though this arrangement was something more. Was it possible that he felt something too? As they continued walking, the sound of laughter caught their attention. A group of guests had gathered by the pool, and some of them waved at Jacob as he passed by. It was a reminder of the world he inhabited, a world of wealth and power, a world she was only temporarily a part of. But as she looked around at the people smiling and chatting, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just pretending. She wasn't just a waitress playing a role. She was a part of something real, even if only for a moment. Jacob's grip on her hand tightened slightly, and she looked up at him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her heart race. They reached a bench near the fountain, and Jacob sat down, pulling her gently beside him. He leaned back, looking out over the gardens, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze on her. "You're different," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I didn't expect you to be so real." Natalie blinked, taken aback by his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob turned to face her, his eyes locking with hers. "You're not like the others. You don't care about status or wealth. You just are." His words made her heart skip a beat. She had never thought of herself as anything special. But here he was, the millionaire CEO, telling her she was different in a way that felt important. For the first time, she felt seen. The moment lingered between them, thick with unspoken feelings. But just as quickly as it had started, Jacob stood up, breaking the tension. "Let's go back," he said, his tone back to its usual businesslike edge. As they walked back to the main house, Natalie couldn't help but wonder if she was starting to fall for him. But she quickly dismissed the thought. She couldn't afford to get attached. This was just a job. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. When they returned to the house, Jacob seemed to slip back into his role, the charming, enigmatic CEO who didn't let anyone get too close. Natalie, however, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this arrangement than met the eye. She was no longer just a contract partner. She was someone he was beginning to care about, and that terrified her. The weekend was far from over, and Natalie couldn't help but wonder where this would all lead. Would she be able to keep up the act? Or would the truth about their growing connection come to the surface? Only time would tell, but one thing was for certain. This weekend was about to change everything. As the day progressed, Natalie began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The carefree stroll through the gardens, the quiet moments shared with Jacob, everything felt surreal, as if she were living in a dream that she didn't quite understand. They had both stepped into roles, played a part in a contract, but the boundaries between the real and the fake seemed to blur more with every passing minute. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jacob was not just the businessman he had been portraying. There was something more beneath the surface, something she wasn't sure how to handle. As they returned to the house, the evening set in with its usual elegance, but the atmosphere felt different. The guests had gathered in the grand living room, sipping champagne, mingling, and talking in hushed tones. Jacob moved seamlessly through the crowd, his confidence apparent, while Natalie stuck close to his side, trying to remain in character. But her thoughts kept drifting. Every time their hands brushed, every time he smiled at her, she felt a flutter in her chest. What was happening to her? Was she really starting to fall for him? The evening's events progressed, with dinner and speeches from various attendees, but Natalie's mind was far from the festivities. She felt as though everyone in the room could see through her, that they could sense her uncertainty. Jacob had been mostly aloof, stepping in and out of conversations, his presence commanding attention wherever he went. Yet, every now and then, their eyes would meet across the room, and she would see something different in his gaze, a softness, a hint of something deeper that she couldn't quite place. After dinner, Jacob suggested they step outside for a breath of fresh air. The cool evening breeze kissed her skin as they walked to the edge of the property, where the trees whispered in the wind. For a moment, everything felt quiet, like the world had slowed down, just for them. "I know this isn't what you expected," Jacob said, his voice low and sincere. "But you're doing well. I'm grateful you're here." Natalie looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. "I didn't think I'd be here, to be honest," she confessed. "I didn't expect any of this." Jacob smiled, but there was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't just talking about the weekend retreat. There was more. She could feel it. "I've been thinking," Jacob said, taking a step closer to her. "This arrangement, it's temporary. But it's more than just a business deal for me. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't want to just be playing a role anymore. This isn't just for show." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob paused, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "I'm not used to letting people in. But there's something about you, something real. I didn't expect it, but I can't ignore it anymore." Natalie's mind was spinning. This was getting complicated. She had come here for the money, for the chance to pay off her debts and get her life on track. But now, she was starting to feel something more for Jacob. She wasn't sure if she should embrace it or pull away. "I didn't expect to feel this way either," she admitted, her voice shaky. "But I'm not sure what it means." Jacob took her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "I don't know either," he said softly. "But I want to figure it out. With you." They stood there for a moment, the world around them fading away as they both tried to make sense of what was happening between them. For the first time since this whole weekend started, Natalie allowed herself to lean into the feeling. She had come here to play a role, to pretend, but now, she wasn't so sure what the lines were anymore. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, Natalie realized that this weekend had already changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer just pretending to be someone's partner for a weekend retreat. She was beginning to feel like she was a part of something real. The next morning, Natalie woke up with a sense of uncertainty lingering in the air. Jacob had been distant during breakfast, his usual confident demeanor replaced with a quiet intensity. She couldn't help but wonder if he was thinking the same thing she was. Could this be real? Or was it all just part of the act? She had to know. As they made their way to a private event that afternoon, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Would Jacob stay true to his role as the aloof businessman, or was he ready to face whatever was brewing between them? And more importantly, was she ready for it? Only time would tell, but Natalie couldn't deny the pull she felt whenever Jacob was near. She had a choice to make, and it was one she couldn't take lightly. The days that followed were filled with a mix of tension and anticipation. Jacob's distant demeanor only seemed to make things more confusing for Natalie. She had felt a connection, something real, the night they had shared a quiet moment by the fountain. But the next morning, Jacob had pulled back, retreating into his usual role as the untouchable CEO. It was as if the walls he had carefully constructed around himself had gone back up, and Natalie wasn't sure what to make of it. She had come here with one purpose, to fulfill a contract. But now, with every passing hour, she found herself questioning that purpose. Was she just a pawn in his game? Or was there something more? She tried not to let her emotions get in the way of the job. After all, this was just business. Yet, every time she saw Jacob, her heart would race, her thoughts would scatter, and she couldn't help but wonder if he was feeling the same way. The weekend was drawing to a close, and with it, their time together. The guests began to pack their things, and the air grew thick with the realization that this could all end soon. Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something life-changing, something she wasn't ready for. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about Jacob. She found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected, and the idea of walking away from him made her feel like she was losing something she couldn't quite understand. As the final evening of the retreat approached, Jacob suggested they take a walk around the property one last time. The night was cool and clear, and the stars shone brightly above them, casting a peaceful glow over the expansive grounds. It felt like the calm before the storm. They walked in silence for a while, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Natalie couldn't bring herself to speak, afraid that if she did, she would somehow break the fragile moment they were sharing. Jacob, too, seemed pensive, his usual confident stride replaced by a more contemplative pace. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jacob spoke. "I know this isn't what we signed up for," he said, his voice soft but steady. Natalie turned to look at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This weekend, it was supposed to be a contract," he said, his gaze focused on the path ahead of them. "But now, I can't stop thinking about you. I don't know how this happened, but I don't want it to end." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. She had felt it too, but hearing him say it out loud made it all the more real. "I don't want it to end either," she admitted, her voice shaky. "But this was just a business arrangement, Jacob. We're not supposed to feel anything." Jacob stopped walking, turning to face her. His eyes locked onto hers, intense and unwavering. "Who says we're not supposed to feel anything?" he asked, his voice low. "Just because it started as a contract doesn't mean it has to stay that way." The words hung in the air between them, and Natalie felt her pulse quicken. She had been trying so hard to keep her emotions in check, to remind herself that this was just a job. But now, standing here in the moonlight, with Jacob looking at her like that, she realized that she couldn't deny what she was feeling anymore. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I'm saying that I care about you," Jacob replied, stepping closer to her. "And I don't want to walk away from whatever this is between us." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. She had expected him to keep his distance, to end things the moment the weekend was over. But now, as he stood in front of her, his words hung in the air, and she realized that she wanted the same thing. She wanted more than just a weekend getaway. She wanted something real. "I don't know what this means," she whispered, looking up at him. "But I don't want to lose you." Jacob's hand reached out, cupping her cheek gently. "You won't," he said softly. "I promise." And for the first time in a long while, Natalie believed him. The weight of the weekend, the tension between them, had all led to this moment. As Jacob leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle yet full of promise, Natalie knew that this was no longer just about the contract. It was about the connection they had formed, the bond that had grown between them despite their best efforts to keep things professional. The kiss deepened, and for the first time in days, Natalie allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back. She was no longer just playing a role. She was part of something real, something that wasn't going to end when the weekend was over. As they pulled away, Jacob looked at her with a mixture of tenderness and something else, something that spoke of a future they hadn't yet fully embraced, but were both ready to explore. "This isn't the end, Natalie," he said quietly, his forehead resting against hers. "It's just the beginning." The following days felt like a whirlwind for Natalie. The lines between the contract and something deeper had blurred in ways she never imagined. Jacob had kept his promise, maintaining his distance at times, but also showing her moments of warmth that made her question everything. The retreat had ended, and now, they were back in the real world, or so it seemed. As the week went by, their time together continued to feel just as complicated as it had during their weekend. Natalie went back to her regular life, but her thoughts were constantly with Jacob. She tried to focus on her work, to keep her mind on the things that mattered, but it was hard to ignore the fact that everything had shifted. Every text, every call, felt like a thread connecting them, and yet, it felt like a thread that could snap at any moment. Jacob wasn't the kind of man to chase after someone, she knew that much. But there were moments when she felt like he was reaching out to her in ways that didn't quite align with the business arrangement they had started with. She didn't know where they stood, but she also didn't know how to pull away. She found herself waiting for him to make the first move, but every time she tried to figure him out, he left her with more questions than answers. That evening, as she walked into her apartment after another long day, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Jacob. "Can we talk?" The simplicity of the message sent a ripple of nervous excitement through her. She had been wondering when he would reach out again, but now that he had, she found herself filled with both anticipation and fear. What did this mean? Was this it? She had to know. Without thinking, she typed back, "When?" The reply came quickly. "In an hour. I'll be at your place." Natalie's heart raced as she set her phone down, suddenly unsure of what to do next. She didn't want to overthink it, but it was hard not to. This wasn't just about a business arrangement anymore. It couldn't be. When the hour passed and Jacob's knock echoed through the door, She felt like she was stepping into a new chapter of something that could be incredible or completely disastrous. She opened the door to find him standing there, his usual confident expression replaced by something more serious, more vulnerable. "Hey," he greeted her, his voice softer than usual. "Can I come in?" "Of course," she replied, stepping aside to let him in. They stood in her small apartment, the silence hanging between them like a thick fog. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, his usual smooth demeanor gone, replaced with an uncertainty that caught Natalie off guard. "I've been thinking," he started, pacing slowly as he spoke, "about what we talked about at the retreat. About us." Natalie felt her stomach tighten at his words. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jacob stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "I've been trying to keep things professional, keep it business. But I can't stop thinking about you. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm not willing to just let this fade away." His words hung in the air, and Natalie's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. He wasn't just talking about the weekend anymore. He was talking about something real. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted. "I don't know what this means." Jacob took a step closer to her, his eyes searching hers. "I know. I don't have all the answers either, but I do know that I want more. I want to see where this can go, and I'm willing to fight for it." Natalie felt her throat tighten. She had been trying so hard to keep her distance, to remind herself that this was just a contract, a deal. But Jacob's words, his sincerity, made it impossible to ignore what she was feeling. "But we're not the same," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're in a different world. This was just supposed to be a weekend." Jacob smiled softly, the warmth returning to his eyes. "Maybe, but sometimes the best things in life don't come in neat packages. And sometimes, the right person is the one you least expect." Natalie swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice shaking. Jacob reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I don't expect you to be, but I'm asking you to take a chance on me. On us." The words settled in the room, and for a moment, everything felt still. Natalie looked at him, searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was honesty. This was no longer just a contract. It was something more. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "Let's see where this goes." Jacob's expression softened, and without saying another word, he pulled her into a kiss that felt like the start of something new, something real. As they pulled apart, Jacob's eyes met hers, full of promise. "Thank you," he whispered. Natalie couldn't help but smile, a wave of warmth flooding through her. Maybe this wasn't just a business deal after all. Maybe this was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. And for the first time since the weekend retreat, she felt like she had made the right choice. The days that followed were a blur of emotions for Natalie. She had made a decision that changed everything, but now she found herself caught between the life she had known and the one she was stepping into with Jacob. The connection they shared was undeniable, yet there was a growing sense of unease that she couldn't ignore. Jacob had been true to his word, showing up when he said he would, spending time with her, and making it clear that he wanted more than just the business arrangement they had initially set up. But the world he came from, his power, his wealth, the expectations, felt like a constant reminder that they were from two entirely different worlds. Natalie couldn't help but feel like an outsider, even though Jacob had made her feel like she belonged. It was a Saturday afternoon when the conflict she had been avoiding finally reached its peak. Jacob had invited her to a private event, a charity gala that he was hosting for one of his companies. She had dressed carefully, picking out a simple but elegant dress she had found online, nothing too flashy. But as soon as she stepped into the ballroom, surrounded by the high society crowd, she felt out of place. The rich and powerful mingled effortlessly, their conversations a blur of business deals and insider gossip. Natalie tried her best to keep her composure, smiling and chatting with a few of Jacob's associates. But her mind kept drifting to the one thing she couldn't ignore, the life she didn't have, the life Jacob had. Jacob, however, seemed completely at ease. His presence commanded attention, and it was clear that the room was his domain. He moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who had been born into this world. But when his eyes found hers, there was a softness in his gaze that made her heart flutter. He came over to her, his smile genuine as he offered her his arm. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice low and warm. Are you doing okay? Natalie smiled, but there was a nervous edge to it. I'm fine, she said, though her voice didn't quite match the words. Jacob studied her for a moment, sensing her discomfort. You don't have to pretend, you know, he said quietly. I know this isn't your world, but it doesn't have to be. Not for us. His words were meant to reassure her, but they only served to highlight the growing divide between their two realities. She wanted to believe him, to let go of her fears and just be with him. But the weight of her own insecurities was hard to shake. As the night wore on, Natalie found herself retreating into the background. She watched as Jacob charmed his guests, laughing with them, sharing stories, making them feel at ease. She had never seen him like this before, so confident, so in control. And as much as she wanted to be a part of it, she couldn't help but feel like she didn't belong. The guests around her didn't seem to notice her discomfort, or maybe they didn't care. They were more focused on Jacob, as always. She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the connection they had built, the moments of tenderness they shared when it was just the two of them. But the cracks were starting to show. By the time the evening was winding down, Natalie was emotionally drained. She had spent the entire night trying to fit in, trying to prove that she could be part of Jacob's world, but it felt like a losing battle. Jacob seemed to sense her exhaustion. As the guests began to filter out, he turned to her with a soft smile. Come with me, he said, taking her hand. He led her outside to the balcony, away from the noise and the crowds, to a quiet space where the city lights twinkled below. The cool night air was a welcome relief, and Natalie felt a small sense of peace settle over her. Jacob stood beside her, his presence calming. I know it's not easy for you, he said, his voice gentle. This is all new, and I can't imagine what it feels like to be thrown into this world, especially when it's not your own. Natalie nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I don't belong here, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I'm not like you. I don't have the wealth, the status. I don't know how to fit in. Jacob turned to her, his expression serious. You don't need to fit in, Natalie. I don't care about any of that. I care about you. His words hit her like a tidal wave. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider, but in that moment, Jacob made her feel like she was enough. But I'm not sure I can keep pretending, she said, her voice trembling. I don't want to feel like I'm just playing a part in your world. Jacob reached out, taking her hands in his. You don't have to pretend. Not with me. I want you, the real you, all of you. His sincerity melted the last of her doubts. She realized that, for all the differences between their worlds, what they shared was real. It was more than just a contract, more than just a weekend. It was a connection, one that didn't need to be defined by wealth or status. As they stood there on the balcony, the city lights flickering below them, Natalie knew that she was no longer an outsider in Jacob's world. She had a place in it, right beside him. And for the first time, she felt at home. The days after their conversation on the balcony felt like a turning point in their relationship. Natalie had never imagined that she could feel so certain about anything, especially when it came to someone like Jacob. The barriers between them, his wealth, his powerful position, had always seemed like a massive divide, but now, with every passing moment, she felt that divide shrinking. Jacob was no longer just the aloof CEO. He was someone she could truly see herself with, someone who saw her for who she truly was. They spent the following week together, navigating the fine line between business and personal. Jacob was careful not to overwhelm her, and Natalie tried to let herself be open, to embrace what was slowly growing between them. But she was still hesitant. She had never been one to trust easily, and the complexity of their situation made it all the more difficult. Despite their connection, the reality of their differing worlds kept nagging at her. Jacob had made it clear that he didn't care about status or wealth, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was a ticking clock, that the moment they ventured too far from their original arrangement, everything could fall apart. On a sunny Thursday afternoon, Jacob invited Natalie to an art gallery opening he was hosting. It wasn't a grand affair, just a small showcase for emerging artists, but to Natalie, it felt like a step forward. They arrived together, and as soon as they entered the gallery, Jacob's presence commanded the room. It wasn't about his wealth. It was about his influence, his ability to move through a crowd with ease, to make people feel seen and important. As they walked through the exhibits, Jacob gently guided her from one piece to the next, explaining the background of each artist and what they hoped to convey through their work. But for the first time, Natalie wasn't focused on the art. She was focused on him, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It was as if the rest of the world didn't exist when they were together. They stopped in front of a piece that caught Natalie's eye, a painting of a lone figure standing under a tree, bathed in soft light. "I like this one," she said, her voice soft. Jacob glanced at the painting, then at her. "I thought you might," he said, his smile gentle. "It reminds me of you." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, not sure if she really wanted to know. Jacob's smile faded just slightly, and he leaned in a little closer. "You've always been the one standing in the shadows, waiting for your moment. But now, you're stepping into the light. And I see it. I see you." Her breath caught in her throat. The way he spoke to her made her feel like she was the most important person in the room. But at the same time, it terrified her. She had spent her entire life trying to hide parts of herself, to keep the world at a distance. But with Jacob, it felt different. He wasn't pushing her to be someone she wasn't. He was pushing her to be herself. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she whispered. "To step into the light, I mean." Jacob's hand found hers, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to be ready," he said softly. "You just have to take it one step at a time. And I'll be here every step of the way." She looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of hesitation, any hint that he might be playing some game. But there was nothing there, just honesty. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her in Jacob's world. As the night went on, Natalie began to relax. The fear, the doubt, everything that had been holding her back, started to fade away. She was still terrified of what it all meant, but with Jacob by her side, she felt like she could face anything. As they left the gallery and walked out into the cool night air, Jacob stopped and turned to her. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to do this alone." And in that moment, Natalie realized that for the first time, she wasn't afraid to trust someone. She wasn't afraid of what might come next. All she had to do was take that step into the unknown. With Jacob beside her, she was ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, Natalie and Jacob settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. They had navigated the uncertainty and the emotional turbulence of their connection, and now, it seemed as if they were truly on the same path. Jacob had kept his promise to be there for her, and with each passing day, their bond deepened in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Natalie had never felt more alive, more seen, than when she was with him. The contrast between their worlds, his wealth and power, her humble beginnings, had become less of a barrier and more of an opportunity to learn from each other. They had found common ground, not in their social status, but in the shared understanding that they both wanted something real, something that transcended the roles they were supposed to play. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet park, hand in hand, Jacob stopped and turned to face her. His eyes were filled with warmth, but also a deep sense of sincerity. "I know we've talked about where this could go," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But I need to ask you something. Something that I've been thinking about for a while now." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a little unsteady. Jacob took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to keep this a secret or pretend it's just a fling or some arrangement. I want you, Natalie. For real. I want to build something with you. A life. Together." Natalie's mind raced as the weight of his words settled over her. She had known that this was coming, in a way. She had felt the change in their relationship, the shift from something temporary to something with real potential. But hearing him say it out loud made her heart swell with emotion. "Are you asking me to?" she started, but she couldn't finish the sentence. Jacob smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm asking you to be with me, to build a future with me. No more pretending, no more contracts, just us." For a long moment, Natalie stood there, stunned by the simplicity and beauty of his words. She had never thought she would be in this position, never thought she would have a future with someone like Jacob. But here she was, standing in front of him, ready to embrace everything that was about to unfold. "Yes," she whispered, barely able to contain the flood of emotions. "Yes, I want that too." Jacob's face broke into a grin, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. In that embrace, everything else, the fears, the doubts, the challenges, melted away. They had made it. They had found their way through the maze of their differences, their fears, and their uncertainties. And now, they had a chance to create something truly special. The following days were filled with plans for the future, for the life they would build together. They made decisions about where to live, what projects to pursue, and how they would continue to grow as a couple. The love they had for each other was no longer just a fleeting connection. It was something solid, something they both believed in. As they sat together one evening, discussing their plans, Jacob reached for her hand and looked at her with a smile that was both content and hopeful. "I'm glad you said yes," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Because this is just the beginning, and I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as you're by my side." Natalie squeezed his hand, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She had come so far from the girl who had walked into that retreat, unsure of what she was getting into. Now, she was standing at the beginning of a future she never thought possible. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace it. "Me too," she replied, her voice steady and full of certainty. "I'm ready for this. For us." They leaned in, sharing a kiss that felt like the final seal on everything they had built together. It was a kiss that promised new beginnings, a kiss that marked the start of a journey neither of them had ever expected but were both eager to take. And as they pulled away, Jacob looked at her with a smile that spoke of everything he couldn't say in words. "This is just the beginning, Natalie. We're going to make it work." "I know we are." Natalie nodded, her heart full. "I believe that too." And as they stood there, side by side, in the glow of the setting sun, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because, in the end, they had found what they both needed most: love, trust, and the courage to take a leap into the unknown. Together. In this captivating story, follow the journey of a young woman who unexpectedly becomes entangled in the world of a successful millionaire, only to discover that the line between business and personal relationships can blur in ways she never imagined. As the two navigate their connection, they find themselves facing the challenges of navigating different worlds, emotional uncertainties, and a growing bond. Through the twists and turns, this narrative is a beautiful reminder of how even the most unlikely millionaire stories can lead to deep, genuine love. From an arrangement meant to be temporary to a partnership built on trust and affection, this tale is full of heart, showing how sometimes the best stories come from the most unexpected places. Millionaire stories like this one remind us of the power of vulnerability, the importance of staying true to oneself, and how love can thrive when two people are willing to open their hearts to each other. With each step of the journey, the characters discover that they can find happiness and balance, even in the midst of contrasting lives. This is not just a tale of wealth and power, but one of emotional healing, growth, and love, proving that no matter the beginnings, millionaire stories can end in something truly beautiful. Dive into this romantic, heartfelt journey that explores not only love, but also the connections that make millionaire stories truly memorable.